It begins in silence, deep beneath the snowbound forests of eastern Poland. A small excavation team, searching for wartime relics, stumbles upon a rusted hatch sealed under decades of ice. The markings are German, faded but unmistakable. Inside lies a chamber untouched since 1945. Metal crates stamped with the Black Eagle, reels of film, and a single journal marked Project Morgenroll. As lights flicker across the frozen walls, history exhales, revealing the traces of a forgotten experiment, hidden at the war's chaotic end. What they uncover will rewrite what we thought we knew about the final days of the Reich and the desperate science that defined them. Chapter 1. Before the Storm. Europe on the Edge. In the early 1930s, Europe was still healing, or at least trying to. The Great War had left a scar that refused to fade. Across cities like Berlin, Warsaw, and Paris, monuments of loss stood beside cafes filled with uneasy laughter. People wanted peace, but fear lingered beneath the surface. Fear of hunger, of ruin, of being forgotten. Factories were rising again, but so were tempers. Old flags, long buried, began to flutter in the wind once more. Germany, humiliated by defeat and burdened by debt, was restless. The Treaty of Versailles had cut deep, territories lost, pride stripped, and hope slowly drained away. In the smoky beer halls of Munich, a voice began to echo. Adolf Hitler, with his fierce eyes and words that burned like fire, promised to restore greatness. To many, he sounded like salvation. To others, a warning. By 1933, his words had become law. The swastika unfurled over every government building. The radio, once a tool of connection, became an instrument of persuasion. Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer. One people, one empire, one leader. But behind the slogans, fear grew. Books were burned. Neighbors disappeared. Silence became safety. Elsewhere, the world watched. Britain's politicians, weary from war and still mourning a generation lost, urged caution. France fortified its borders, believing concrete walls could keep the future out. The United States, across the ocean, turned inward, grappling with depression and unemployment. No one wanted another war. Yet in the East, the Soviet Union was rising fast, its factories roaring, its citizens driven by both fear and belief in a different kind of empire. In the small towns of Poland, life carried on with quiet resolve. Farmers tilled the same soil their ancestors had defended for centuries. Children played in the shadow of cathedrals and castles scarred by earlier battles. They'd heard of Hitler, of course, but Germany was far away, or so it felt. Even as soldiers trained near the border and new lines were drawn on secret maps, few could imagine how soon those fields would burn again. Across Europe, science and industry marched in lockstep with ambition. Laboratories hummed with electricity and possibility. Jet engines, rockets, and strange experiments whispered of a new kind of warfare. In Berlin, engineers sketched designs for machines that could fly faster than sound. In Britain, radar towers rose along the coast. And in laboratories hidden beneath universities, physicists began chasing the secrets of the atom. But for all the progress, darkness spread quietly. Propaganda painted enemies where there were none. Radio broadcasts filled homes with fear of outsiders, of betrayal, of tomorrow. In the cafes of Vienna, Jewish scholars debated philosophy under the weight of glances that grew colder with each passing year. Families that had once felt European began to feel hunted. The continent was dividing again, between belief and reason, between memory and denial. The old alliances of World War I no longer held. Treaties were rewritten, borders redrawn. It was a game of strategy, but the pieces were human lives. And beneath all this, a race for knowledge was underway. Military officials spoke of Wunderwaffe, miracle weapons that could decide wars before they began. Research stations appeared in the mountains of Bavaria, the deserts of Libya, the frozen reaches of Norway. Not just tanks or planes, but experiments in physics, psychology, and biology, projects too secret for official reports. Ordinary citizens knew nothing of this. To them, the future was uncertain, but peace still seemed possible. A teacher in Prague might write in her diary about the first spring flowers after a harsh winter. A young engineer in Hamburg might sketch an aircraft design in the margins of a newspaper. Hope was still alive, fragile, yes, but real. Then came the marches, the parades, the oaths. In the summer of 1938, German troops rolled into Austria to cheers and salutes. Soon after, Czechoslovakia was next, its borderlands swallowed in the name of unity. Leaders in London and Paris protested, but did nothing. "Peace for our time," declared Chamberlain, waving his paper of false assurance. But peace had already died. As 1939 approached, the world held its breath. Trains moved through the night carrying weapons and fuel. Codebreakers worked behind locked doors. And somewhere in the quiet woods of East Prussia, a team of scientists began constructing something strange. An underground complex shielded by steel and secrecy. It was called Morgenrot, the Red Dawn Project. They said it was about defense. They said it was about energy. But no one outside its barbed fences knew the truth. The workers were sworn to silence, and the engineers' reports vanished into classified archives. Even among Nazi officers, only a handful were aware of its existence. As Europe inched toward the brink, the first snow fell over Poland. Villages settled into winter routines, unaware that within months their lives would change forever. And deep underground, machines began to hum, powered by ambition and fear. The storm was coming, and when it broke, it would sweep across the continent with a force unlike anything the world had ever seen. The old world was ending, and in its place something darker was preparing to rise. Chapter 2: The Descent into War. By the spring of 1939, diplomacy had become theatre. Smiles at summits masked clenched fists beneath the table. Hitler's speeches grew more confident, his armies more restless. Each parade through Berlin's streets was a warning, a promise that the Reich would not be contained. Across Europe, ambassadors exchanged coded cables and anxious glances, but few dared to confront what they already knew. War was no longer a question, it was a schedule. In early August, a secret meeting took place in a heavily guarded room inside the Reich Chancellery. Maps spread across the table, generals traced lines through Poland, marking targets and timetables. The invasion plan was precise, efficient, almost surgical. Hitler called it Fall Weiss, Case White. When one of his staff expressed concern about Britain's reaction, the Führer snapped, "Our enemies are weak. They will protest, but they will not act." His certainty filled the room like smoke. Far to the east in Moscow, another meeting was taking shape. Joseph Stalin, cautious yet calculating, agreed to a proposal delivered in whispers by German diplomats, a pact of non-aggression. In secret clauses, they divided Eastern Europe like spoils on a chessboard. When the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was signed, the world saw two sworn enemies shaking hands. Behind that gesture lay betrayal, ambition, and the death warrant for millions. In Warsaw, ordinary citizens sensed what was coming. Men drilled with wooden rifles in fields outside the city. Mothers stocked food, though stores were nearly empty. Newspapers printed updates on border incidents and diplomatic negotiations. But few believed the reassurances. One schoolteacher, noting her fears in a diary, wrote, "They say war is unlikely, yet the sky feels heavy." On the night of August 31st, German operatives staged a false attack on a radio station near Gliwice. They dressed prisoners in Polish uniforms, executed them, and broadcast fake transmissions as proof of Polish aggression. The next morning, without declaration or warning, German forces rolled across the border. At 4:45 a.m., the battleship Schleswig-Holstein opened fire on the Westerplatte garrison. The Second World War had begun. As reports reached Berlin, Hitler's staff erupted in applause. But the reality at the front was chaos. The Luftwaffe bombed roads clogged with refugees. The Wehrmacht advanced with terrifying speed. Their new strategy, Blitzkrieg, a storm of armor, air power, and shock. Within days, Polish defenses crumbled under relentless assault. Villages burned, trains packed with civilians vanished beneath columns of smoke. In London, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's voice trembled as he spoke into the microphone. "This country is at war with Germany." Across the Channel, the French army mobilized but hesitated. The phony war began, a strange calm before Europe ignited. Inside Germany, propaganda turned the invasion into spectacle. Newsreels showed smiling soldiers and triumphant marches. But beyond the camera's reach, a darker operation was already underway. The SS followed the army's advance, rounding up undesirables, political opponents, Jews, and anyone deemed a threat. Poland became a laboratory of occupation, a testing ground for the regime's policies of terror. And far beneath these movements, in that secret facility in East Prussia, Project Morgenrot entered its second phase. Engineers received crates labeled Kraftquelle A, Power Source A, The contents were known only to a handful of scientists, many of them conscripted under threat. One of them, physicist Otto Lenz, later wrote in a smuggled letter, "We are building something we do not understand. It hums like a living thing." By 1940, Europe was collapsing. Denmark and Norway fell in weeks. France, once proud and defiant, was conquered in 6. In occupied Paris, German officers toasted champagne beneath the Eiffel Tower, while resistance fighters hid in cellars, printing leaflets on stolen presses. Britain stood alone, its cities bracing for the Blitz. Winston Churchill, newly appointed Prime Minister, addressed his nation with iron resolve. "We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall never surrender." His words carried across the Atlantic, stirring American listeners who still hoped to stay out of the war. Meanwhile, in the frozen tunnels of Morgenrot, experiments continued under the watch of the SS. They spoke of energy dispersion, of a new kind of propulsion. Lenz and his colleagues were forbidden from keeping written records, but they etched notes into the lining of their workbenches. Rumors spread through the camp that the project was not defensive at all, but an attempt to weaponize the forces of nature itself. Outside those walls, the human cost grew unbearable. Warsaw was in ruins, Rotterdam flattened, Coventry burned, millions displaced, millions dead. Yet Hitler's ambitions only expanded. His eyes turned east, to the vast plains of the Soviet Union. He called it Lebensraum, living space, but it was conquest on an unimaginable scale. In June 1941, Operation Barbarossa began. 3 million German soldiers poured into Soviet territory. Entire cities vanished beneath fire and steel. As winter set in, the Wehrmacht stalled outside Moscow, and the myth of invincibility began to crack. In the laboratories of Morgenrot, the cracks appeared too. Power readings spiked beyond prediction. Machines overloaded. One night, deep within the facility, a sudden surge caused a blackout across the region. Witnesses described a pulse, white light that seemed to burn without heat. The next morning, the lead scientist was gone, his office sealed by the SS. The project's purpose was redacted, its funding doubled. All the while, the world above fought and bled. Families were torn apart. Soldiers froze in foxholes, civilians hid in basements, counting the seconds between air raids. But beneath the noise of battle, another war was being waged. One fought not with bullets, but with equations, chemicals, and silence. By the end of 1942, the tide had begun to turn. The Allies regrouped in North Africa. Soviet forces held at Stalingrad, and as factories in America and Britain roared to life, Germany's dream of domination began to falter. Yet inside Morgenrot, the scientists pressed on. Orders came from the highest level: accelerate results. They no longer knew what they were building. Some whispered it was an engine, others a weapon, but every test ended the same way: light, vibration, and failure. Lenz, in a final hidden note before he vanished, wrote only this: "If we succeed, we end the war. If we fail, we end ourselves." Europe was consumed by fire. The descent was complete. And at the center of it all, hidden beneath snow and secrecy, something strange continued to hum in the dark. Chapter 3. Firestorm, the turning of the tide. Winter came to Europe like a sentence. By early 1943, the continent was exhausted, battered by years of war that showed no end. The snows of the Eastern Front were stained with rust and ash. In the ruins of Stalingrad, the once proud German Sixth Army froze where it stood, surrounded by Soviet divisions who refused to yield another inch of soil. Soldiers on both sides dug into the permafrost, hungry, sleepless, and half mad from the cold. Every shot echoed across the Volga like thunder over ice. News of the disaster reached Berlin in February. For the first time, the propaganda machine faltered. There were no triumphant parades, no orchestrated cheers, just silence, and the uneasy realization that the Reich could bleed. In hidden corners of the city, people whispered what they had never dared before: perhaps he can lose. But Hitler would not admit defeat. He called Stalingrad a temporary setback. Orders went out for total war. Every man, woman, and factory pressed into service. The airfields of occupied Europe filled with bombers. The scientists in Morgenrot were told their time was running out. Deep beneath East Prussia, the tunnels buzzed with tension. Generators coughed and groaned. Lenz's replacement, Dr. Wilhelm Hauser, studied the equations left behind and shook his head in disbelief. "It's not propulsion," he murmured to an assistant. "It's extraction." But from what, he could not say. The SS guards outside didn't care for theory. They wanted results. In the spring, the Allies launched their counteroffensive in North Africa, pushing Rommel's troops toward the sea. The desert skies glowed orange each night with tracer fire. Young pilots, barely trained, screamed over the radio as their planes disintegrated in mid-air. At El Alamein, a British officer described the battlefield as a furnace lit by the devil himself. Then came Sicily. Then Italy. The Allies were clawing their way back, one bloody mile at a time. Hitler's empire was shrinking, but even as bombs fell over Hamburg and Berlin, orders kept arriving at Morgenrot. Continue tests. Prioritize the core. Hauser's journals, later recovered from the facility, speak of a machine that emitted both light and magnetic distortion. Instruments failed in its presence. Birds, he wrote, avoided the site entirely. One entry, dated November 12, 1943, reads, "The field intensified beyond expectation. The metal warped as if breathing. Something resonates beneath the frequency we can measure." While the war raged above, the scientists below lived in a world of flickering lamps and fear. They heard the distant tremors of air raids, the faint rumble of artillery, and wondered if their own work would bring that same destruction upon them. The SS officers overseeing the project seemed increasingly desperate, hauling in crates of uranium salts, mercury tubes, and heavy water from captured territories. To the scientists, it was chaos disguised as purpose. On the Western Front, chaos became reality. June 6, 1944, D-Day. The beaches of Normandy erupted under the weight of the largest invasion in history. The sea turned red with courage and loss. Allied soldiers clawed through sand and smoke as German defenses rained fire. Somewhere near Caen, a young medic named Peter Whitfield wrote in his journal, "We kept moving forward because stopping felt worse. The invasion worked. France began to rise again. The Reich's grip loosened. In Paris, the resistance surged from the shadows. Train lines were cut. Supply convoys vanished. The dream of victory in Berlin began to fracture into paranoia." Inside Morgenrot, Hauser received a visit from an SS Obergruppenführer, a man with a cold smile and eyes like glass. He demanded proof that the project was progressing. Hauser tried to explain that the experiments were unstable, that the core risked catastrophic failure. The officer leaned close and whispered, "Failure is death." The next day, 2 assistants were executed for sabotage. By late 1944, the machine was almost complete. Its central chamber, an alloyed ring of tungsten and copper, was designed to generate fields beyond known physics. Hauser believed it could distort matter itself. He begged to shut it down. The SS insisted on a full activation test. On the night of December 14th, the lights flickered across East Prussia. Villagers miles away reported a low hum that rose to a shriek. Cows collapsed in their fields. Birds fled in swarms, circling wildly before vanishing into the trees. Then came the flash. White, silent, and brief. In Berlin, instruments at the Reich Research Council registered an anomaly. A burst of radiation unlike any seen before. Communications with Morgenrot ceased immediately. When a recovery unit arrived 3 days later, the facility's lower levels were flooded. The walls were scorched as though from within. Of the 47 personnel assigned there, only 6 were found, alive but unresponsive. Their eyes remained open, staring at nothing. The SS sealed the site and classified the event as a containment failure. All records were transferred to the Reich Chancellery. Hauser's name vanished from the archives. The war above ground carried on, indifferent to what had happened below. January 1945. The Red Army was closing in. Hitler retreated into his bunker, issuing orders to imaginary divisions. Cities burned. Refugees filled the roads, dragging what little remained of their lives through snow and mud. As the Allies crossed the Rhine, the Reich began to crumble. But as Soviet troops advanced through East Prussia, they stumbled upon the ruins of the Morgenrot complex. Inside, they found twisted metal, strange instruments, and a sealed vault that pulsed faintly, as if something inside was still alive. They took what they could carry and left the rest to be buried by snow and silence. The war would soon end, but its secrets were already scattering across oceans, across governments, across the pages of history yet to be written. And though the world would celebrate victory, beneath the surface, something remained unfinished, something waiting to be rediscovered. Chapter 4: Shadows of Victory. The guns finally fell silent in May 1945. Across Europe, the air felt heavier, as if the continent itself exhaled for the first time in 6 years. But the silence was not peace, it was exhaustion. Cities lay in ruins, bridges twisted like bone, fields scattered with the wreckage of machines and men. The war had ended, yet its echoes lingered in every shattered window, every unmarked grave. In Berlin, Soviet soldiers raised their flag above the Reichstag. The city, once a monument to power, was now a wasteland of ash and concrete. Survivors picked through the rubble in search of food, photographs, and meaning. Children stared blankly at the sky, too young to remember what peace was supposed to sound like. In the ruins of Hitler's bunker, the smell of fuel still hung in the air. There was no triumph there. Only the quiet realization that even the most brutal empires eventually collapse under their own weight. For the victors, victory brought questions. The Allies had uncovered horrors beyond imagination. Camps filled with death, files of meticulous cruelty, experiments performed in the name of science. In laboratories across Germany, Allied investigators found notes and blueprints for weapons that should not have existed. Rockets, nerve agents, and fragments of a project so secret that even the SS records were incomplete. Project Morgenrot. When British and American intelligence teams reached the facility in East Prussia, they found only ruins. Soviet troops had arrived first. The entrances were sealed. Inside, the air reeked of ozone and burned oil. The tunnels were scorched, but strangely intact. The scientists were gone. The Soviets claimed it was a failed energy experiment. Nothing more. But the Western teams didn't believe it. They noted that the radiation levels were higher than background, that some of the instruments were unlike anything known in the Reich's official programs. The equipment was packed up and sent to secret research centers under new code names. For the soldiers who had survived the front lines, the war didn't end with signatures. It lingered in their bones. In Poland, displaced families tried to rebuild their homes from splintered timber. In France, collaborators were paraded through the streets in shame. In Japan, the atomic bomb would soon show the world that destruction had entered a new era, one born from the same pursuit of knowledge that had fueled Morgenrot. Hauser's notes resurfaced briefly during the Allied investigations. They spoke of resonant fields, unstable containment, and non-linear radiation. None of it made complete sense, even to the scientists who studied them. Some believed it was the early outline of a propulsion system. Others thought it was an attempt to weaponize plasma energy. Whatever the truth, the documentation was incomplete. Dozens of pages were missing, deliberately removed before the fall of Berlin. The Soviets, meanwhile, transported crates from the site to a new research institute near Moscow. Files labeled Object 12 were assigned to military physicists and locked behind layers of classification. Those who worked on the recovered materials described them as beyond our theoretical framework. Some believed it was a hoax, a dead end from a desperate regime. But a few whispered that it wasn't failure they'd found in those tunnels. It was a beginning. For civilians, the years after the war were a different kind of battle. Hunger persisted. Cities were divided by ideology as quickly as they had been divided by bombs. Germany was split in two, East and West, its people living under competing visions of order and freedom. The old allies turned suspicious of one another. And somewhere amid the rebuilding, the shadow of Morgenrot was folded into a new struggle. The Cold War. In the East, Soviet engineers began testing high-energy systems for radar and propulsion. In the West, American scientists who had once studied captured German technology were recruited for Project Paperclip. They brought with them fragments of documents, memories and theories. Some from the very scientists who had worked under Hauser. One of them, when questioned by US intelligence, simply said, "It was not meant to destroy, it was meant to reveal." The meaning was never clarified. Meanwhile, families searched for closure. The relatives of the Morgenrot staff petitioned both governments for information, only to be told that the men had died in service to the Reich. No graves were marked. No bodies were returned. For decades, their names remained footnotes, buried beneath more comfortable narratives of victory and liberation. By 1949, new nations were forming from the ashes. East Germany, West Germany, NATO, the Warsaw Pact. The world had split, and the fault line ran straight through Europe's heart. On one side, communism, on the other, capitalism. Both sides armed themselves with the same scientific ambition that had nearly destroyed them just years before. And yet, in the quiet corners of intelligence archives, the word Morgenrot appeared again. Redacted reports, intercepted communications, references to field tests and resonant anomalies, always vague, always denied. A British MI6 memo from 1952 mentioned unexplained magnetic fluctuations in former East Prussia. The Soviets dismissed it as Western paranoia. The Americans called it Soviet propaganda. Neither admitted to conducting tests, but both kept watching. For those who lived through the war, memories became ghosts. Old soldiers stared at empty chairs where comrades once sat. Mothers carried faded photographs in their wallets. Across Europe, stories of loss blurred into legend. And in the towns near the Morgenrot site, strange tales circulated, of faint humming beneath the frozen ground, of radio static that pulsed like a heartbeat during winter storms. No one believed them, of course, not officially. The world wanted to move on, but history has a way of resurfacing when least expected. The war's survivors knew that peace was fragile, that truth buried too deep has a habit of clawing its way back to light. And somewhere beneath those forests, where machines once sang in frequencies unknown, the remnants of Morgenrot still waited in silence. Victory had come, but not without shadows, and some of those shadows were still moving. Chapter 5: Echoes Beneath the Ice. 70 years later, the past began to stir again. It started with a tremor, minor, barely noticeable, beneath a frozen forest in northeastern Poland. A seismic team studying permafrost shifts recorded a rhythmic pulse, too regular to be natural. The readings matched nothing known. When they traced the signal's source, they found themselves standing above what used to be East Prussia. Locals called the place the Dead Valley. Nothing grew there but pines and silence. At first, the discovery seemed routine. Old bunkers were common across the region, relics of both the Wehrmacht and the Red Army. But when a small drone descended into a fissure in the ground, its camera caught something startling. Steel walls, riveted and intact, covered in frost. The hatch bore faded markings. Project Morgenrot. The signal they had recorded, it turned out, was not seismic at all. It was electrical. Within days, a joint European archaeology team arrived. Specialists in wartime infrastructure, historians and technicians, each one aware that the find could rewrite a piece of history. The air inside the shaft was thick, metallic and cold enough to sting the lungs. Frost clung to the walls in symmetrical patterns, as if shaped by design. Deeper in, they found what looked like control panels, some German, some Russian, all fused together by decades of corrosion. Then came the chamber. A vast circular room. Its floor collapsed in the center, cables snaking into a void below. On one side, a table covered in brittle papers, blueprints, sketches, handwritten notes in both German and Cyrillic. The words Resonanzkern aktiv appeared again and again, resonance core active. The documents bore both Nazi insignia and, shockingly, Soviet seals dated 1952. It became clear that the site had not been abandoned after the war. It had been reactivated. The revelation sent shockwaves through the academic and intelligence communities. Historians debated what it meant. Had the Soviets tried to restart Morgenrot? Had Western intelligence known? Within weeks, government officials arrived at the dig site, citing national security. The area was sealed off. The research team's communication went silent. But one of them, a young Polish archaeologist named Karolina Wozniak, managed to leak several photographs before her equipment was confiscated. The images showed the central core, an alloyed ring fused to the floor, half melted, half preserved. Around it, the remnants of machinery far ahead of anything known from the 1940s. When analyzed, the metal's composition didn't match any recorded wartime alloy. It contained traces of isotopes that suggested intense energy exposure. Perhaps nuclear, perhaps something else. Forensic experts compared the handwriting on the recovered notes to that of Dr. Wilhelm Hauser. It was a match. His signature appeared beside calculations labeled Phase 2, Phase 2. He had survived the 1944 incident, at least long enough to continue his work under Soviet supervision. Soon, declassified Cold War documents began to fill in the blanks. After the Red Army captured the Morgenrot site, several surviving scientists were taken east. The Soviets created a covert division, Laboratory 12, focused on experimental energy systems and field distortion research. By the mid-1950s, the project was quietly shut down after what internal memos described as a catastrophic resonance event. All records were sealed under the new codename, Objekt Krasny Rassvet, the Red Dawn object. Modern physicists reviewing the available data still disagree on what Morgenrot was meant to be. Some suggest it was an early plasma containment test, a primitive attempt at fusion energy. Others point to magnetic propulsion or radar manipulation experiments. But fragments of Hauser's last notes tell a stranger story. The energy reacts to presence. Observation alters stability. It seeks equilibrium but finds chaos. It might have been science. It might have been desperation. But either way, it was too advanced, too dangerous for its time. When the European Union requested further investigation into the rediscovered site, Russia declined cooperation, claiming the records were lost in the 1990s. Yet satellite images taken weeks after the find showed the entire area covered with heavy tarps and newly built fencing. By winter, all entrances were sealed again, under a layer of snow and concrete. Karolina Wozniak, the archaeologist who leaked the photos, vanished in early 2023. Her apartment was found empty, her laptop erased. Friends said she had grown paranoid in the months before, convinced she was being watched. One of her last emails contained a single line, "It's still active." Whether she meant the technology or the cover-up, no one can say. Today, Morgenrot exists only in fragments, photographs, faded blueprints, and the haunted testimonies of those who touched its legacy. Yet the implications linger. In an age defined by energy crises, AI warfare, and rising tension between powers, the story of Morgenrot feels less like a relic and more like a mirror. It reminds us that knowledge can outlive morality, that progress, once unleashed, rarely returns quietly to the ground. And as snow once again blankets the forests of northeastern Poland, locals still report a faint hum on winter nights, a low, steady rhythm beneath the earth. Scientists call it coincidence. Engineers call it interference. But the old ones, they just shake their heads and whisper the name history tried to erase. Project Morgenrot, the dawn that never came.